Apparently, no mission is impossible. Hi, this is Scott Ott with Bill Whittle now. And Bill, we've talked about this before, but stuff's starting to get real with Tom Cruise and Elon Musk's space movie project. According to a Twitter account called Space Almanac, at Space Almanac, Tom Cruise and writer-director Doug Liman are both booked for an October 2021 launch of a SpaceX rocket going to the International Space Station. Now, it just seems like yesterday that we saw Bob and Doug come back from their mission to the ISS, where they spent some time. Bill, both as the guy who's a space nut who created the Apollo 11 What We Saw series and has been fascinated with space all this time, and as one who admittedly lives at the gates of Mordor near Hollywood, is it too soon to be sending Tom Cruise to space in October 2021?
Before I answer that question, I'd like to point out that as a private space enterprise, it's naturally conservative. Elon Musk is leaving California for Texas. And I think in light of that, immediately after Tom Cruise and the other guy booked their flight, that they should take Ted Cruz and me and run us up there, and we could have Bill and Ted's excellent adventure.
There is one seat available, so perhaps you'll have to sit on Ted Cruz's lap.
I'll ride in baggage, man. You can put me in the overhead compartments on that one.
So, but seriously, when you think about the
soon.
risk of these launches, and they've only really had one manned mission so far, and already this time next year, we're talking about Tom Cruise putting on the suit.
Well, a couple things to say about that. First of all, it's not too early. It's about 40 years too late, but better late than never. The second thing to say is that the Dragon capsule and the Falcon rocket system are remarkably advanced systems. The escape system in the Dragon capsule is unlike anything I've ever seen before, and I would ride that thing tomorrow without any hesitation whatsoever. And the third thing that I think bears mentioning is that I don't particularly see any reason why Tom Cruise's life is any more valuable than Bob or Doug's or anyone else's.
Well, and Tom Cruise apparently would see things the same way. He's quite famous for doing his own stunts, strapping himself to the side of an airplane and dropping from incredible heights on a free dive from an airplane. So he sees things that way, not to mention jumping off the Burj Khalifa Tower. But nevertheless, you'd think that there's important work going on in these launches and on the space station itself. And here are a couple of tourists making a home movie that's going to get shown throughout the world. It just seems to me that isn't this a distraction from what really should be going on with space exploration and science?
Au contraire.
He spoke French.
Oui. Look, the space station's been up there in one form or another for almost 30 years now, I want to say, and completed for at least 15, 20. I don't remember the exact date. And that tells you something in itself. But the fact is that we've had that space station permanently occupied for decades now, and whatever science that needs to be done on the space station continues to be done. The idea that we were doing science in space was one of the reasons that the space station was sold. My personal understanding that the entire reason for the space station was to assemble interplanetary and translunar spacecraft, but you can't use it for that because the inclination is too high, and the inclination is as high as it is. The orbit is tilted as much as it is so that the Russians can get to it. So what space needs right now is it needs private space needs an awareness campaign beyond the outside of the capsule. And you can argue a lot about Tom Cruise and the Scientology thing and getting up on the couch and Oprah and all the rest of it. But I have enormous respect for Tom Cruise for his willingness to do the stunts himself. And furthermore, he is an extraordinarily good pilot. He's a very, very good pilot. I believe he has his own P-51 Mustang, and that is a handful of airplanes. So I can't think of anybody better. Not only can I not think of anybody better in terms of their actual flight experience, but I can't think of anybody better than Tom Cruise because he's the biggest movie star in the world. By the way, my understanding is that Maverick, the Top Gun sequel, was filmed virtually all of it was filmed with the actors in the backseat of a two-seat F-18. And the reason that Tom Cruise insisted on doing that is because you cannot fake the G loads that are put on a fighter pilot in a tight turn. All of a sudden, you may weigh 2,000 pounds, and your face sags and you're breathing and you're grunting. And my understanding is that he told the actors who he was going to hire as other pilots that we're going to do a lot of this stuff in the air under high G loads. And again, that has a great deal of respect from me, certainly.
I also recently read that there's like a $5 fine for any person in the real Top Gun flight school who uses any line from the Top Gun movie.
Is it only $5? I would have thought you'd be washed out of the program. If I hear Roger that one more time when I talk to a passenger in the backseat of a just a private flight that I'd be giving as a private pilot, you all set to go? Roger that. Okay, but
I did that when I was a school bus driver.
But well, it's cool when you're a school bus driver. Yeah. But it is not only is it an appropriate thing to do, it's a smart thing to do. Elon Musk is running a business, and this is advertising, and it's the best kind of advertising, and the space tourism aspect of space exploration seemed to be, looking back at it, in the early 2000s, when my friend Burt Rutan put the first private citizen in space in Spaceship One, 2004, as I recall, it seemed like the suborbital flights were going to be what kept private space alive long enough to develop orbital technology. Virgin Galactic basically bought the second iteration of Spaceship One, Spaceship Two, and they still haven't flown passengers yet. That's 16 years later now. Blue Origin is still working on their new Shepard rocket, which is designed for suborbital flights and looks like fun, but it hasn't flown passengers yet. And meanwhile, Elon Musk, who decided not to go down that route, is doing orbital flight, which is at least an order of magnitude tougher, and maybe two. And
headed for Mars.
Well, and headed for Mars, and smart enough also heading for the moon before he goes to Mars. The thing about Elon Musk and SpaceX's success is something that you can see. You can actually see the physical evidence of it, and you can also see the sort of almost the spiritual evidence of it. If you look on YouTube, you'll be able to see just an assembly of every single SpaceX failure that ever happened, every rocket that exploded, every time it didn't get to orbit, every landing that failed, and that video is put together by SpaceX, and that is why SpaceX succeeds, because they're not afraid to fail, and they're not afraid to fail big. But the thing about SpaceX, and the reason that SpaceX has been as successful as they have been in such a short time, I want to say they first flew the Falcon 1. It was 15, 16 years ago, and things happened very quickly. But they're not afraid to fail, and they understand that failure is part of the business. So long as they learn from the failure, they're ready to proceed. And we've discussed this before, Scott. But while we're looking now at the Falcon 9 rocket and Tom Cruise is going to ride the Dragon capsule and all the rest of this stuff is going on, and you would think that would be enough to keep you busy with a Falcon 9 heavy lift rocket, you'd think, man, okay, he's got his hands full now. No, while all of this stuff is stealing the spotlight, he's out there testing the Starship rocket, which is enormous rocket, and it's blowing up. And that's what rockets do before you figure out how to run them. So I think it's great that Tom Cruise is going. He has my respect for that, for many other things as well. I can't imagine a better spokesperson, and I can't imagine a better combination.
Well, and you almost can't imagine NASA or any government-run agency thinking in these terms. I mean, if the right stuff had it right back in the day, NASA actually put top test pilots in capsules that actually needed nothing but a monkey. And in fact, that was a complaint of some of the test pilots, is that they really didn't have control of the craft. And so it was all top test pilots. Then it was scientists. But the idea that they could ever put tourists or filmmakers or actors up there would be antithetical to the way that agency thinks.
Which is appropriate. You know, when you first start flying airplanes, you want test pilots. You don't want to put passengers on there. You don't want to put teachers on there. You don't want to put anybody else on there. You want people who know what they're doing for two reasons. First of all, if there's an emergency, you want somebody who knows how to handle the emergency to the best of any human ability. And secondly, and more importantly, I think, you want somebody who understands the risks well enough so that when they accept the risk, they have a full, wide open decision to make. You could tell somebody that a rocket is mostly safe and they'd get on it or not, but a test pilot has a very good idea, an extraordinarily good idea of not only what could go wrong, but how it could go wrong and what would happen to his physical body if it did go wrong. And I think one of the things that I've noticed about the test pilots that I've met, and I've been fortunate enough to meet quite a few of them, is that they are blessed by a lack of imagination in some areas. And that's not to say they're not bright people. They're the brightest people I've ever met by a wide margin. But they seem to have a lack of, it's not so much even a lack of imagination. They have the discipline to not wallow in what could go wrong. They take a look at the risks. And there have been many cases of people deciding, I'm just not flying that. No way. And so that's a quality of it. And that's why I think Tom Cruise is such a good choice because, as I said, given the stunts that he's done and the flying that he's done, he seems to me not only more than anybody in Hollywood, virtually more than any other civilian I can think of, a guy who understands the risk-reward balance. And I just wish him the very, very best. And
so at some point in the perhaps near future, the pre-screening question for getting onto one of these ships will not have to be, tell us about how many times previously you've almost died. Because it seems like that's a pre-qualification. If you're a test pilot, a Hollywood actor who does his own stunts and stuff like that, you're getting people who are comfortable with the notion that this may be the last moment, but it's worth the risk. At some point, tourism to space will be like tourism to France. You're not getting on a plane thinking, I may die in the process.
Yes, it'll be tourism to space will be exactly like tourism to France, but it won't be quite such an alien experience.
You won't wind up in an...
I think the bigger point is the fact that Tom Cruise is going. You said just a minute ago that you couldn't imagine NASA doing that, and I just realized my microphone is not attached. So hopefully, we will see how that sounds. But I think the bigger issue, Scott, is not just that Tom Cruise is going, but what you said about NASA not ever conceiving of NASA being able to do that. If you look at all of the names that are aerospace legends now, Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop, Grumman, Hughes, all of them are the names of individual people who started their own companies and are able to make the kind of weird decisions that, for example, Howard Hughes made when he decided to build the H-1 Hercules. Otherwise known as the Spruce Goose. Yeah. He decided he wanted to do it. Most people thought he was nuts, but it was his company and he did it. And the ability for one person to have that vision and decide, well, we could just throw 40 cubes of cement into orbit to see if this thing's going to lift what we say it'll lift, or we could put a Tesla Roadster up there and put a guy in the steering wheel with his arm out the side and have "Don't Panic" on the navigation screen. This is what happens when you have private enterprise. You have a person whose vision is followed and backed up by a huge team of engineers, but person who just decides that this is what I want to do, and that's why they do it. And that's why the iPhone is there, because
final question for you, Bill. Yeah. And this one is, I'm going to ask you to put on your visionary and more of your Hollywood hat. I would imagine, although I don't know because we're not sure what movie is being shot or will be shot on this mission with Tom Cruise and his writer-director friend. But how soon do you think it will be before we see a movie on the big screen or streaming or however they do movies then, that is shot in space or in orbit or on another planet or on the way to another planet, but is not about space in the sense that when you go to a movie today that's a love story, it's not about two people falling in love on Earth. It's just a love story. How far away are we from when the setting of the movie becomes normal and they're just telling stories in that setting?
I would say we should be there by 1966.
Because that's where you're a Star Trek fan.
I quite sincerely remember James T. Kirk planting a big kiss on a green-skinned slave girl from Orion, and so I can't really answer that question because we've been talking about setting things in space forever, and there's no real advantage to setting it in zero G, except that maybe the hair floats up a little bit. The better question, I think, is how soon will we see a movie that is a space-based movie that's shot actually in space. And if I had to guess, I would say within 2 years after Tom Cruise's flight. Apollo 13 came as close as they could get. Apollo 13 had an enormous amount of the movie took place inside the Apollo capsule, and a significant amount of that had them moving around. And so in order to film Apollo 13, they had to go to the only place where you can find zero-G weightlessness on Earth, and that is at the top of a parabolic flight path on board a converted 747 called the Vomit Comet. And they built sets on that thing. And basically the jet just climbs, and then it pushes over the top, and you get about 40 seconds of weightlessness in the same way that you get on the top of a roller coaster. And they would do 40 or 50 of these things at a time. But if you look at Apollo 13, you'll see guys just actually floating, turning around, doing things, tossing bottles and stuff. That kind of thing is tough to do, and I think we'll see it in space in the very near future.
The members at BillWhittle.com have made this program possible. You can join them today by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking that big green button. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.